Did you know that St. Luke's University Health Network has been recognized by the U.S. government as the highest performing health system in the United States for quality? You heard right. St. Luke's #1 recognition affirms our status as the top leader among the most respected healthcare providers in the nation, including Houston Methodist and the Mayo Clinic. To state it simply, if you want to receive the best care when you go to a hospital, come to St. Luke's.
Listen, all you New Yorkers.
Excuse me, taxi.
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
All right, let's bring in Theo Wald. He is a former Assistant Attorney General and former Deputy Assistant to President Trump for Domestic Policy. I certainly want to talk about the SAVE Act with Mr. Wald. Theo, thanks for joining us for the first time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. It's good to be with you.
Of course, and I appreciate your patience. So I want to get your top line thoughts on this. As far as the SAVE Act, Fox News poll, 84% of Americans support showing an ID when you vote, just like you do when you, board a plane like I did today, or when you rent a car, or a thousand different examples of this with dozens upon dozens. Basically, every advanced country requires this. Democrats are obviously against it. In the end, if this fails in the Senate, okay, and it looks like it will, because you need 60 votes. You know how this works. There's only 53 on the Republican side. So is there a legal option here? Can this go to the Supreme Court somehow to say, hey, look, this is wrong. We need, obviously, ID for voter integrity or something along those lines. I'm talking to you like a guy who obviously never went to law school, but can you bring us down that road? Are there any options for the Trump administration if this fails in the Senate?
Yeah, unfortunately, the way that the Constitution lays out the claims for election law at the federal level, the best option for the Trump administration, if this does not move forward in the U.S. Senate, would be to take it to the states and for each state to pick up the mantle of imposing a citizenship verification requirement in state election law. Otherwise, the president could try through an executive order. It would be challenged. And I think a lot of the process leading up to a Supreme Court intervention would have a lot of federal judges basically saying, nice try. This isn't something you can do through unilateral executive action. You got to have a statute here. So it would be very tricky. And this is just an unfortunate part of how the Senate is currently constituted. It's not only that Republicans are short a 60-seat majority, but there are a lot of things that they could do short of nuking the entire filibuster. They could resume what we all call the talking filibuster. Everyone's seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In order to filibuster back in the day, you actually had to hold the floor. And they don't do that anymore. They just do it by procedure. So there's a lot of rules that Republicans in the Senate could do, but you got a lot of old dogs like McConnell and some of those folks, some of the moderates, who don't want to change the procedures of the Senate. So we're stuck in this impasse.
And we're talking to Theo Wald. You could follow him at Real Theo Wald on X. And that's the thing here. If Republicans may be forced to blow up the filibuster, right? I mean, then you only need a majority, obviously. The problem when you do that is the Pandora's box that could open up as far as Democrats getting back into power. And then suddenly you have a Supreme Court that looks like more of like an NBA roster, right? When I forget 9, we're going to 12, or, maybe even like a baseball roster where we have a 25 Supreme Court justices, and then you may have another situation where Puerto Rico and DC become states, and that's automatically basically 4 more Democratic senators and perhaps permanent control of that chamber. And I could go down the line as far as all these different things that could happen if one party just needs a majority, I should say, in order to pass things. But that's something that John Thune and the president and others need to figure out at this point. I want to go to this because I'm a guy who follows media often and talk about it a lot on Fox News. But we had a situation on Monday night where Stephen Colbert had on a Democratic Senate candidate from Texas. And because of I guess there's a couple of different ways to put it, I suppose, but you need to give equal time to competing political candidates under FCC rules. And forever, Stephen Colbert, we're talking about hundreds of Democratic guests especially candidates, and we're talking like the very top, whether it's Kamala Harris, Democratic nominee, all the way through like Bernie Sanders has been on Colbert something like 21 times since Colbert took over for Letterman. Elizabeth Warren's been on 16 times. It dwarfs the appearances from like Seth Rogen and George Clooney and like, Julia Roberts, like actual stars. I guess the thing here is that we had a situation last night where the FCC, at least in Texas, would not show the interview that Colbert did with James Talrico, who's running against Jasmine Crockett for, at least on the Democratic side, before they would take on a Republican in a red state. And now the left is completely up in arms here, saying that, well, Trump just wanted to block this interview because this candidate is such a threat and can win Texas. He's the next Beto O'Rourke, that they decided to take him off the air, and now they're playing the victim card. Explain to the listeners a little bit more about the federal law that's existed since the early 1930s that has required broadcast media to give equal time to competing political candidates. Colbert is not doing here. Their argument, I guess, is that, well, he's a comedian and comedians, they're just doing entertainment. Well, this show has not been entertainment for years. It's been a political super PAC, basically, for Democrats. The only Republican that's ever appeared on it in the last couple of years has been named Liz Cheney, which many would argue probably not your typical Republican. So I'll give you the floor here. But do they have an argument here as far as, hey, we're just a comedy show, we shouldn't have to give equal time, or does it apply here?
No, I actually think, Joe, something really ingenious is happening here. And it's another example of how the left is just 8, 9, 10 paces ahead of the right in thinking about ways around the law. The Communications Act has been on the books since 1932. It's a long, time-honored federal law. And as you noted, it requires broadcast media to give equal time to competing political views. Now,
like
I know
CBS.
For most, exactly, like CBS, ABC, NBC. So a lot of your listeners, this is true for a lot of Americans. We don't really know the difference anymore between broadcast media or, a simulcast on your, whatever vehicle you're using, Roku, Netflix. So the average consumer thinks of it as just like NBC has all kinds of streaming services. NBC is no different than, this service over here. Distinguishing between them is kind of difficult. So what Colbert essentially wanted to do is he wanted to platform Talrico. He doesn't want to platform Jasmine Crockett. He wants to give Talrico the best shot, not only in the primary, but against his Republican opponent. So he films Talrico, but he releases the video only online. And then everyone who sees it online, they see the studio set up, they see this, they think it's the Tonight Show with Colbert, and they think, well, this is great. And so Colbert, who, as you know, has virtually no TV viewers anyway, he reaches a wide audience, the same audience he's going to get no matter what, because his most success is on the streaming content he posts on YouTube. And then they get to gin up all of this hostility and anger that somehow Trump stopped Stephen Colbert. This is another example of Trump's censorship of the media. And they get to generate even more eyeballs for this clip. I actually think this is a really ingenious way for the left to get around the 1932 Communications Act, which requires, as you noted, it requires if you're going to have a Democrat on, you got to have a Republican and vice versa. Instead, what they've done is they've created a made-for-the-internet clip that is now going viral because they at the same time got to attack President Trump as the cause of all of this.
Wow, that's such a great point. You're right. It is a loophole. It is a workaround. Obviously, no one's tuning in to see Colbert already, right? He's a very distant second to my colleague, Greg Gutfeld, and he's going off CBS in May. Why CBS kept him around until then so he could pull this stuff is just unbelievable to me. But to have on this guy that 99.9% of the country outside of Texas has never heard of before, and he's the featured guest, so to speak, this has gone viral. Now more people know James Talarico's name, certainly. But you're right. I think in a world now where you don't need a studio anymore per se, and what I mean is like satellite trucks and broadcasting on a CBS, NBC, ABC. Now you could just create like a streaming option, and you don't need. It's almost cost free. And we even saw it with the Super Bowl. As far as Bad Bunny, but then Turning Point USA says, all right, we're going to do our own halftime show, and attracted somewhere around 7 million viewers. So, it's interesting the way you explain that. And again, now Colbert gets to play the victim, just like Jimmy Kimmel and Don Lemon, who I want to ask you about next. And we're talking to Theo Wald. Theo was the deputy assistant to President Trump, and also a former Solicitor General of the state of Idaho. So, Theo, with Don Lemon, I mean, this seems pretty open and shut for me. But again, I am not a lawyer, but all I know is that we have somebody who purports to be a journalist who flew out from New York, somehow knew the one church where a storming was going to take place by a mob to break up this service, to get in the face of parishioners, and even the pastor himself, as Don Lemon did. In this case, Lemon told the cameraman to shut off footage at a certain point in the parking lot as to not give away what was happening. Lemon interviewed the head of this mob, giving this person a kiss in the cheek when it was done, and bought coffee and donuts for these folks before they stormed the church. Lemon obviously arrested under the KKK Act and under the FACE Act. Does this have any legs, or will this just be like everything else where Don Lemon gets a bunch of publicity and nothing happens to him for clearly breaking the law?
No, I mean, I actually think there are legs here. And the problem isn't exactly what happened on camera, what we saw from Don Lemon when he was in the sanctuary of that church. It's what he did beforehand. And the violations that were brought against Don Lemon in the indictment are for essentially the interference of the civil rights of folks of religious faith to practice and worship their religion without interference in their sanctuary. 18 U.S.C. 241 is the federal code here that Lemon's been cited under. And the thinking here is, for a long time, there was a lot of press on this at the time of his arrest. For a long time, the left has used this law, one of which is called the FACE Act. And it's essentially been a tool for the left to prevent even silent protesters from a gathering outside of abortion clinics and interfering with the right of folks to access abortion services in those clinics. There have been any number of essentially harmless, innocent Americans arrested under the FACE Act, including under President Biden in a couple of midnight raids of private citizens' homes. So same act here now being applied in a religious context, which is the interference with religious worship. And the problem for Don Lemon is going to be that he had conversations, he met with some of these BLM leaders there in the Twin Cities prior to them actually deploying to these church sites. And he was made aware of their plans, which was essentially to interfere with the worship, to surround the Sunday school services and to, berate the children. All of these things are criminal conduct. And Don Lemon not only acquiesced to it, but he, helped them plan the deployment and then their activities in these churches. So in many ways, the way you can think about it for your listeners is he's kind of a co-conspirator, and that's not what he's being charged with, and that's not how the law works here, but he's essentially actively participating in a criminal conspiracy to interfere with the civil rights of innocent worshipers.
And he, of course, is the former deputy assistant to President Trump. We'll definitely have you back, Theo. Thanks so much. And good luck with father of 5. I have 2. I'm on vacation right now, kind of a working vacation. 5, I don't know how you do it, but God bless you, sir.
Duct tape and WD-40, Joe. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Well said. All right. Theo Wald, everybody. We'll definitely have him back.